Hi everybody, yes, so my name is Miguel Jimenez, I'm from OpenDAP, a non-for-profit organization that focuses on open source software and make NASA data available for free to everybody in the world. So I'm going to present this little introductory to getting started with NASA data. It may not be just NASA, but it's just in general data, and NASA data is not just data that's looking outward, it's also looking inward. So I did my education here at University of Washington Oceanography, so I looked a lot of NASA data. And so I'm going to refer to as Earth data from NASA. But yeah, thank you, I'm very happy to be here. Thank you. And also we have satellites that just went up onto space. They're still sending data in all formats. One of the formats that I found, sorry, this is an introduction, kind of motivation why it's called NASA data as opposed to space data. And one of those old formats is FITS. Anybody has heard of that format? All right, I heard about it recently. That's, yeah, we can talk a little bit more about that. Anyway, so I talk about NASA data rather than space data because even though that's data that's coming from satellites, a lot of those satellites are looking inwards into space. So I say that because I'm an oceanographer. I actually did my education at UW, and I'm migrating back to Seattle area recently to work remotely for OpenDAP. And a lot of the stuff we do is look at satellite data to understand mixing processes. So I kind of focus a little bit on the North Atlantic region where it's cloudy all the day, so there's no good satellite data there. So anyway, that's why it's NASA data. So a little bit of what to expect today is a lot of challenges, lots of different types of data. Some of that is Earth data, what I'm saying, like data that's even though from space, it's actually looking inward. Kind of like, well, for example, I was really actually excited to see PACE data. There's a challenge called PACE data in the classroom. PACE is a satellite that went into space on March. So pretty recently, we were all excited, like people at NASA, myself, was really excited. It's looking inward, like this unprecedented resolution of chlorophyll, aerosols, and like all of this at the surface of the ocean, all this ecology is going to help a lot of scientists to discover more about like how these microorganisms are taking and producing a lot of like helping. I don't want to go into the technical stuff, like helping a lot of the ecosystem starting from the top. There's also a lot of different types of data. And so I'm going to try to motivate why data is important and what to expect, the challenges to expect working with these older data sets coming from very far away. So a little bit about more, let's keep talking more about data, maybe how it's generated. I kind of mentioned a little bit before, like all of this, the fleet of like all of these satellites that NASA has launched. And not just NASA, but also the partners of NASA, like ESA, for example. They just launched these things with instruments, some of them looking inward, some of them just like trying to gather data, and then they're still out there sending these data that was, as we in Earth migrate to newer and sometimes more scalable computing technologies, these data types are not really written for that. And so you, and I'm saying because also scientists like myself, we face this a lot. It's a big part of solving a problem is how to find and work with the data that you have. Where do I find it? How do I open a file? How do I open a FITS, FITS data file? How about NetCDF3, NetCDF4, HDF5, HDF4? Anything sounds familiar to anybody here? Well, you're gonna have to work with that. How do you open that file? How do you make a plot? What's inside that file? Anyway. So NASA has traditionally creates all of this data that sends and then distributes into these data active archival centers. Distributed around the world, around the US in different states. I don't think we have anything in Washington State, but all of it, for example, physical oceanography is in like California, actually associated, I think, with USC, I believe. They have this institution there. And ocean biology, which is all of the PACE data, ironically, is ocean. It's on the biological center. So anyway, again, working with air data, all of you people who are going to work with data, sometimes maybe you want to look at what DAC associated with and just go to the DAC site. Instead of like, again, because there's a lot of really useful resources in each of the challenges you'll find, but also different types of resources. But if you also want to look at data, you can just go directly to the DAC. And maybe there's a way to make this presentation available, like on the Google form, if you guys want to. But I'm pretty sure if you just Google NASA DACs, all of these, there's 12 of them, and they're by like kind of like area of expertise. Yes. Now let's talk about how big is big in big data. We were talking about a little bit about big data here from NASA. Well, NASA is still continuously receiving data from all these satellites, also launching new satellites, and more resolution, these data files coming back. So we're producing petabytes and petabytes of data that are being stored traditionally in these distributed active archival centers, the DACs. But it's getting to the point where it's kind of unmanageable to actually make them available through, say, OpenDAP, like ourselves, through the web for free. It's really hard to just move around data. And so NASA, for the last couple of years, I think since 2017, they started thinking ahead with like maybe start exploring like moving stuff to the cloud. And so it's a period of transition that we're moving. I'm saying but I actually don't work for NASA, I work for OpenDAP. But we're part of the effort to moving a lot of stuff to the cloud. And so that brings two problems for you guys, is that some data will be on the cloud, some data won't be on the cloud. And so that's kind of maybe a big of the challenge as well. Find the data and maybe you'll be able to access. I'm not sure, like I'm assuming some of you, maybe a lot of you, have coding experience. You can just write scripts to download stuff. But some data might not be on the cloud, might be on an OpenDAP URL. And I'm not sure, I'm actually curious, anybody here has heard of OpenDAP or OpenDAP URL? It's mostly used a lot in the past. And that's fine. Most of you might not actually realize that you're using OpenDAP. And that's part of the goal. But anyway, so we're moving, NASA's starting to produce, we're in the 50, 100 petabytes now on the cloud. And we're moving to 300 petabytes at the end of 2030. As a point of reference, I was at CERN last month talking to people there. As a visitor, I'm not doing anything there. And then I was just chatting with them. It's like, oh yeah, by the way, how much data do you produce on these collisions? About petabyte an hour. So how much is that stored? Well, most of it is thrown away. But at the end, I think they put order of petabytes a day. But they have the center to store it there. And it's apparently all I just went to the website, they have the Atlas experiment, I think that's new portal, and it's all available HD5, by the way. So that's types of files are archival and you probably will have to work with today. But if you know how to use those files, you can just go to CERN and do science as well. And anyway, so let's we talked about how big data is. Now let's see what type of data you might encounter. This is data that coming from satellites. A lot of it's raw data. Some variables might not be meaningful to you. And so we, like NASA and all these centers, they try to categorize a type of level of processing of data, and that will probably matter to you if you want to look at data and even make a plot of something, what the level of processing is. And so, generally speaking, the higher the level of processing means it's going to play nicer with your computer. Like you'll be able to open it maybe even in a browser or something, depending on your service skills. But yeah, so level 0 is kind of like raw coming from satellite. That usually, 0 and 1 usually isn't available for users, but you might encounter it. Level 2, that's a little bit more, you will find a lot of level 2 data. And that usually, for example, I don't know if this points, but you see that there's a track of satellites. So the level 2 data usually is just data that's just being collected along that track. So it's really almost like a time series, rather than a spatial map. Level 3 data is a little bit more of a map. And then level 4 is usually something in place. It's almost like a model output, really nice rectangular grid. A lot of API, clients can open it, you can make a lot of plots really nicely. Usually that is maybe through a commercial vendor or maybe some institution that's highly processed. NASA does have a lot of level 4 data, but what I see usually with the newer types of data sets, including PACE, which is part of the challenge, is level 3. Do you have a question?
So I see this science ready.
Yeah.
What does that mean? And
that probably
which level?
Well, that's a good question. I don't know the answer of that because I know scientists who work with level 2 data. You can do science with level 2 data, and so science ready to me is well, can I do science? Level 2 usually means I have geophysical derived quantity. So
the
for example,
like for geophysics.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Usually annotate like,
Yes.
as level 3 and 4, which
Yeah.
means you can just take it
Yeah.
forward.
Yeah, so as a scientist myself, I would, if I see level 2, and I know it's like a particular experiment, I could do science with it. So to me, that's science ready. So it really is the level of the expertise of you, of the user. Usually, most of the data that's available is level 2 and higher. Probably you want level 3 or 4. That's probably.
So how much manual manual labor when you're trying to process them, and how much of them are automated when you process the different levels?
If you're talking from the perspective of NASA engineer who's trying to produce the product,
Yeah.
or from a perspective of the user?
Probably from NASA, because
Okay, yes.
it could be automated. I think from the
Yeah.
end user also.
Yeah.
From the job as well. Right?
Yeah, so that's it. And people in the back heard that question? So it was kind of like, so how much of this workflow from going to level 0 to level 3, say, is it automated? It really depends. I don't think most of it's automated, because again, we have the data is unhomogeneous. And it's annotated in conventions that might be outdated. And so I think there is some some way that people have managed to set up those workflows automated. But there is a lot of old data. Old data files that are coming, and our conventions, we call the CF conventions in terms of metadata. They're not uniform across the data available.
Okay.
And so really to answer, I don't know, but my guess is that there's some automation, but not a lot. So you do require a level of expertise. People do probably a master's in science, and they go to work with NASA to work, and maybe bring from level 0 to 1, and then there's an automation into 2. And then once in 2, maybe there's some level of automation to 3 or something. But probably there's right a conversation about machine learning, AI-ready type of data sets. We're not there yet. Yeah, and especially with the older satellites, instruments that went out to space are coming fixed. It's hard. It's going to be a challenge just to work with these data sets.
Just curious, on the level 0, are they just simply analog? Yeah?
I think so, yeah.
Okay.
Pretty close.
Yeah. So yeah. Question in the back, yes?
Yeah. About the level 3 and level 4 data from a user perspective. At the level 3 and level 4 provide.
Yeah, I apologize. I didn't hear very well your question.
Yeah, I'm just asking from level 3 to level 4 from a user. Can we do any more personalization on top of
Personalization for your workflow for
Yeah.
data. I mean, it's up to you. I think once you reach level 3 data, this is a data provider, I think, point of view, is that they don't want to touch more the data. The more specialized to a workflow you make it, the less useful for the broader public, I think. And so I think in most of it's like level 3, and then you kind of like do what you need with it. But then in terms of providing like scripts or something, there are some tutorials that you can find throughout NASA to make plots, to do something, but really they don't. I think there's a pretty strict. We've learned to not make too specialized software clients, because then it will actually be less useful for people. Because you don't know how people will use the data, and we're finding new ways to work with data as we are learning. And that is part of the thing. It's a really good question. But it actually came up in a discussion at NCAR, another kind of like center 2 months ago. That same question. This is a discussion. Yeah. Really cool. Thank you for that. Let's see. Level 2 data, raw data. Level 2, just plot from the file. It's I'm sorry, I apologize. Light gray dash as gray data. It's almost like a heaviside function or something. That's what it would look like. And it's level 2 data. And then I pre-process it a little bit, and that's what you get, that kind of like red-orange. It looks orange to me, maybe it's red. And that's along a track. And that track kind of funnels like that. I actually put a QR code to see, that will take you to a Python documentation that I wrote myself, and generates that data from a file that's hosted from NASA. And I think it's this SWOT level 2 data. pretty recent, probably a couple of years ago, maybe 2019, I forget. Anybody can correct me, it's been a while. But SWOT is like another really cool data set. Level 2 data, I'm gonna go back to that, but probably what you will find when you open a data file and you wanna plot it, it'll be just, and you see the scale on the right, 10 to the 9. It's just like 0, 10 to the 9, 0. It's like, what is this? That's probably part of each challenge. I'm not sure you're gonna work with this data set, but you might encounter something like that, and I'm gonna come back. But this is kind of like what to expect. You will need to work a little bit, and I'm gonna mention where to look at when you're looking at this data set too, so that you're able to take something, it might be 10 to the 9 to 0, into something that might actually look scientific, and that's actually a really cool plot. And actually, I think I have the map. There it is. That's the same data projected into a map, and it's just essentially is kind of like sea level elevation, starting from Iceland, and then just following the triangular satellite all the way south to the Southern Ocean. And so in the data, there was like, you started as positive, relative to the geoid, and then it goes really drop, and the Southern Ocean's a drop of elevation. And that's because we have strong currents there. And so they're in balance with the rotation of the Earth. A couple of scientifics. But that's kind of like what, and this is, again, that's the code, and you can see these maps there. PACE data, level 3 data. That's sea surface chlorophyll and a logarithmic scale. So that's something to talk about, to think about when you're plotting. What's the characteristic there? Well, there's clouds, so there's some, but there's also lots of missing data. Like, what's the deal with that? So that's actually, I'm not saying this is part of the challenge, but it is from the PACE, which is hosted on OpenDAP URLs. So you have experience with that. I'm here to help. It's a little rough. But yeah, so that might look like that, just to plot it. I don't know the Python script. Yes, question?
Are these colors seasonal? Like in spring, let's say that in east of South America is green, but maybe it's blue at another time.
That's a good question. Yeah. So the question is like, will these colors vary? I mean, this is a logarithmic scale, and the answer really is, I mean, yes, yeah, sure. Yeah, there's a seasonality component.
Migration and so many other things.
Yeah, and so one time that I don't want to go into a lot of the science, but we found actually that there's a lot of springtime blooms in the winter time. As you go from the winter to the summer, in spring you get a lot of storms, so the mixed layer of the top of the ocean gets really mixed, and that allows a lot of nutrients to go really close to the surface, and then the chlorophyll, and it just, there's a bloom like spring, like here that you experience in spring from flowers. Same thing happens in the oceans, and tend to be like kind of away from coastlines. These are happening in the open ocean, like a lot of storms. There's a lot of turbulence there, but also you would expect to see high values near the coastlines throughout the year, because there's a lot of upwelling.
So what could be the reasons for missing the data?
What's that?
What could be the reasons for the data getting missed?
Yeah, there's 2 reasons that I can think of. I will open the floor to like a discussion, but I think we should probably not focus too much. One is cloud cover. That's a big thing. And the other one is, this is level 3 data. So this is mapped onto a really nice grid. There is missing information because of the track that the satellite was doing. There still needs some processing to the data to get to something that looks more interpolated into a lat-long grid.
But clouds keep moving, right?
Yeah, so these are kind of like snapshots, and so the way the data creates, it reads a lot of data, so you get a kind of like a probability density function when you're reading the raw data, and then it gets processed. So it's not like model output. There's like, this is a true value. It's like pretty good approximation interpolated near true value, and so you get these weird patterns there in the data. A lot of from cloud cover and missing. Sorry. Yeah.
So I just want to say that there's also, it seems to be a systematic way in missing that data, so there's some kind of pattern.
That's part of the satellite chart. Yeah.
So one artifact there is the Mercator projection. The satellites are in polar orbit, so they converge at the Arctic. But also, we're only seeing one day. The next day, it will be offset and fly through the middle of those jets. Which it goes to level 4, where they might take a time series over 2 days or 3 days and average those out. Yeah, and I think this was for I forget. There's again a QR that will take you to the notebook where I generate this plot, and I believe it's for like the data file covers probably
a couple, maybe a day or 2 days. I forget.
It says that the base data.
It's from that day, but it may cover like maybe 10 and 11 of March of this year. Yeah, something like that. Yeah, yeah. And again, maybe we can talk about this afterwards, more of the sciences. But yeah, the projection going from sphere to a plane, that's a very important one. So what might look like for yourself, like working with data, like this is kind of like a visual representation of a netcdf file. That's something a lot of data will come from, that type of format. There's different types of formats here on the right. So there's H4, which is kind of complicated, H5, CERN uses H5, so that's pretty cool. netcdf 3 or 4, but those are kind of like, when you see a .nc, netcdf file, .what, H5, this is the more common in terms of Earth data that I've worked with, that I found through NASA. There's other types of file, but most likely the data that you will encounter will look like that. And so visually, a data set inside, if you open netcdf file, you have maybe a couple of variables. This is more like a representation of level 4 data. Surface, lat long, and then time. It may look like that. You have precipitation, temperature, and you have another variable called longitude or latitude, and you use them to make a plot on a map, on a flat surface like what I was showing before. And then you have a reference time, and then you can, and that will be a single file. And then you download or you create a script that talks to another file for a different time unit, and then there will be a different. So you can you can create a list of many files pointing somewhere remotely, and you can actually make animations of this. And then HDF5 or netcdf4, I need to mention this because you might encounter them. If you open them, it looks like a POSIX or like a Unix directory inside. You almost can navigate through them. So you can go to the folders, they're called groups, and each of them have a name. And then sometimes they inherit variables or dimensions, we call it like coordinates, inside, like latitude and longitude, or time. So you can start at the root of a directory and you navigate down or into different subdirectories. And those are groups. And so some variables may have like what we call a fully qualifying name, which is almost like if you UL less of PW than your terminal, and you see this directory, it may look like that. And those data files were created just so that satellite data that arrives, that's why they're called archival. They're made for long-term preservation of the data. And you may find data, you may find like numerical array data, you may find a figure there, you may find some stuff that may not be raw data or like binary data or something like that. You may find some different kinds of stuff. And some of the kind of stuff that's important is metadata. So what is metadata? All right? So this is, we were talking with one of the organizers, like, JSON file. Well, JSON file usually has metadata. Things that allows to the data set to be self-describing. So HDF5, in a way, they're self-describing data sets, because once you open, you look at what we call metadata, which may be adjacent. XAR uses JSON files. OpenDAP or like HDF, they might use XML files. It's just metadata representation of what's inside and what's the bytes, the range, chunks, like the units, field values, like missing data. That's where you will find all of that stuff. So that's something you might find yourself. So again, what about the missing data? Well, you look at the metadata of that file, of the variable you want to plot, that you want to analyze. You want to take a derivative along a track or something spatial, and then you get a number that might be minus 10 to the 8th, or something happened there, and the units are meters per second. Like, well, this is not speed. So if you look inside a file, like in HDF5, for example, you may have data which may look like this. Sorry, I apologize for this. Is from the HDF like groups documentation, so I just like to. But this is so in the metadata, you have like something about how many dimensions there are and the names. So you have one dimension that has 4 values only. So you go in the data, you go on the vertical, and then you have dimension 2 has 5 values. The most you move in the other direction, and then dimension 3 moves. There are 6 values, so you move. So this is a cube, and you may have a hypercube of data. But then you also have all this stuff like data types, attributes are important, things that like missing values, like offsets, and what's the third one is like scale factor. Those 3 are very important because you want to get the highest resolution or precision possible. So sometimes, depending on the type of data, you need to scale them till you are able to preserve more decimal points. So that at 10 to the 9, there's probably a scale factor there. So that inside the files defined there in the metadata, but you're able to bring it back to regular units that actually make physical sense. And there's other stuff like chunk data. Anybody has worked with chunk data? Not yet. You will, you will. I promise. Not just because of today. This is what we're talking about. Files that are too big to open on your laptop. And so anybody has heard of DAS?
Yeah.
Yeah, DAS, X-ray. X-ray was I contributed to X-ray, so X-ray was initially developed to work with NetCDF. So they follow the NetCDF model, for example. And they are now bringing HDF5 behavior, which has groups. So I'm kind of involved with that from the OpenDAP perspective, so that if you open an X-ray file, with X-ray you open an HDF5, you may be able to have a data tree type of file there. Anyway, but you will find chunks, and they are essentially you're highly parallelized with DAS or some other stuff. Yeah. So again, I'm almost done, I promise you. So again, going back to the metadata, and again, I made some QR codes so you can just go and see it in action. And there's a bind repository somewhere in OpenDAP. You can play them. You can talk to me after you do that. But this is something it might look like. So I have a data set, and you see it looks like a directory mean dynamic topography. Like data, you have a data group called data01. That's a group inside of HDF5. And so you just navigate directly to the main name of the variable, dot attributes, and this is what spits a field value. If you count, it's an integer, usually an integer. And so that means that probably is either cloud or land. There's no ocean data on land, so that usually you want to make that into dot, not a number type when you're plotting or analyzing. Scale factor, 1 to the -4. So like all of this is where you look into, and stuff like applications like software and so you go from then you're able to create it from the attributes of that data that's inside the file. And so how do you open those files? Well, anybody has heard of Pangeo? Wow, I mean, it's interesting, yeah. So Pangeo is a great resource for the geosciences primarily, but we're talking about Earth data, so we're talking about types of file formats: HDF5, NetCDF4, ZAR, and so I would recommend to look into X-ray. Works with almost all of the files you might encounter, not all of them. It still doesn't work with groups. So HDF5, you might have to. They have their own library, I think H5Py, but I think you can figure out how to open with X-ray, like the HDF5. I work with OpenDAP, so I've been developing PyDAP. OpenDAP has been around for 30 years in the open source science community. PyDAP has been around since 2006, when Python was not what Python is. PyDAP was already doing open source stuff, so that's really cool.
What does DAP stand for?
What's that?
What does DAP stand for?
OpenDAP, Data Access Protocol. Yeah, good question, yeah. And again, you can talk to me, I'm doing it So there's probably other libraries. All of this is open source. You can, people are familiar with Conda, Mamba environments, Python. I'm assuming you are. Conda, Mamba, pip installable. All of this, look at X-ray, look at PyDAP, and PyDAP documentation. I have all of these examples working with NASA data. And PyDAP and OpenDAP do not work with ZAR, but X-ray does. So that's really cool for DAS parallelizing. Depending on what type of workflow you're doing. If you're doing a lot, which is probably not today, that ZAR is the way to do it. The other stuff is still on the works, and that's part of my job. Doing cloud computing with all these archival data sets, which is a really cool project. We're working with HDF5 and all of us in Pangeo and OpenDAP. Last slide, important. I'm not sure if you guys are aware of this, when you're working with Earth, NASA data, and this is something new within NASA, you may need to create an ADL account. The data is available for free for download with a click of your button through something like, it may be on the cloud, but you can download it into your computer. You can create a script like I did for PyDAP and all those QR codes. Pangeo X-ray has plenty of documentation of other examples of other types of data. But important, if you're going to work with some of these challenges that uses Earth's data, like from the DAX that I showed, maybe not like data from for Jupiter or like exoplanets or something. But if you're planning on doing something with these challenges, data is free, but you may not even be able to download it or open the file if you do not have an account. And I recommend to open tokens. You can have username passwords, but once you're inside, and we can talk about it, you can generate tokens. PyDAP with the documentation QR codes, I always use tokens, and we talk with NASA because there's a lot of redirects when you use your username password. With tokens, there's not redirects. And so it's actually more, it's faster response through the net if you're scripting multiple files with many different sources. But you will have to create an account, otherwise you won't be able to look at data from all of the DAGs. All right? You can talk to me about it. It's free. It's from NASA. It's from NASA, so it's like secure. I'm not here to sell anything, and that's it. And if you have any questions, please. I see one question, but yeah, thank you.
What about the human beings? Could you like mention CDAC, which is the population statistics? Because usually we have our data, but we want to see how it affects human beings. Like, are there people here or not?
Right. Yeah. So I think So I talked more about data. And that's right. That's a good point. So I believe, and I scroll through the challenges, like in the gender and climate. There's a lot of really important resources there. You can go through and navigate for sure. Each challenge has their own resources. Very useful. And I think some of the DAGs, I think there's a DAG that focuses on particularly in this type of more demographic data and food justice data thing, I believe. I don't know where it is. One of these DAGs, there's
socioeconomic data applications.
Yeah, right. So that DAG, if you're like want to know more about like social impacts and stuff, you can go to that DAG at the website, and they will have links, access portals or something. And NASA is improving their whole portal, so that's another thing to navigate. Some of the DAGs may not have updated stuff. Again, because also everything's moving to the cloud, so there's a process yet. But yeah, go to your resources. Yeah, each challenge has the resources. You may not even need actual raw scientific data for your challenge. Yeah, any questions? And if we're good, let's hack away, and I'm around today to talk. Thank you very much.